welcome back to NBC News. I'm your host, Aline Saarinen. By this time, the second and third session of the Democratic Convention has happened. In the second session, we heard from what seemed to be the powerhouses, Humphrey and McCarthy. McCarthy had the support of all the protesters in the room, while Humphrey was hardly able to give a speech due to their opposition to him. Ultimately, it led to the arrest of multiple protesters, after which a vote on civil rights was taken that resulted in adding it to the platform. I was able to meet up with Richard D. Gregory of the protesters and Richard Daley after the session. Here's what they had to say.
And so you heard both sides today from McCarthy and Humphrey. So what are your thoughts on hearing McCarthy?
McCarthy, I agree with most of the things that she has to say. She proves a very valid point, and the argument that she makes opposes Humphrey. Humphrey is sort of fake.
Okay.
As you can say, he's kind of inconsistent. He don't really back to what he says. So, that's kind of bad for, what you are going.
And so a number of you all were arrested today. Does this have any effect on your future plans or protests?
No, it has no effect on what I want to achieve at all. I'm still moving forward, and it's what I want to do. So it just like the next step into the process.
So obviously some protesters against Humphrey were detained during his speech today. What are your plans for the future to limit more of this from happening?
I plan on taking it out of hand. I'll just enforce more of the police to come in and make sure that this convention can run more smoothly and give our delegates a chance to talk. I think the interruption between the protesters causes us a problem. We're not able to communicate with each other as easy, and it'll take longer, and so to eliminate that problem, I'll enforce more police action to make sure that they stay out of our way.
Okay, so what influenced your decision to let them go?
What was that?
What influenced your decision to let them go after their arrest?
I think that it was a better overall decision. Also, I was talking to what's her name? I was talking to the chairman of the convention, and she gave me some advice that it was probably a better idea, which it was. It caused them to calm down, and they were about to take over the podium and take over the convention almost as all. But after I let them go, they were able to calm down and come back together. So.
And I know you already touched on it, but do you have any further comments on your plans to ensure the safety of the convention?
More or less just make sure that the protesters don't get out of hand anymore. If I need to take more legal action, I will. But other than that, no, not necessarily.
So moving to session 3, we heard from John Connolly and Fannie Lou Hamer. Like Humphrey, Connolly was interrupted many times during his speech by protesters, but at least this time no one was arrested. After their speeches, there was a vote for infrastructure in the war in Vietnam, but it wasn't quite as straightforward as that. After infrastructure was unanimously added to the platform, a movement for a smoke-filled room was displayed, essentially a private meeting amongst the delegates to discuss how they would vote for the war. While this upset the protesters, the delegates agreed that what to do with the war should be in the hands of the president. This was added to the podium by a landslide. Among the protesters, I met with David Dillinger to see what he had to say. Let's take a look.
What are your thoughts on the smoke-filled room prior to the vote for the Vietnam War?
The secret room?
Yes.
I think it is a very dishonorable practice to have secret meetings in our government. We are a democracy, and we make decisions together as a people. And I think that all these bribes and tricks going on behind closed doors is against our government stance on the issue.
Okay. So, what's your immediate reaction to the vote for escalating or de-escalating the war in Vietnam now being up to the president?
I think it is a risky decision, but I support the decision because I have faith that McCarthy will become president.
So obviously the protesters had an earful to say during Humphrey and Connolly's speeches. Humphrey specifically seems to have an upper hand when it comes to support. So what will happen if he wins? Like, what will the reaction of all the protesters be?
We will be very disappointed if Humphrey wins. We have faith that he will not win, but should he win, we will be very disappointed. I cannot speak for the violent protesters. They might break out, but I know that I do not support violence, and I support peaceful protesting, so I will hopefully be able to contain the protesters, but I can't speak for some of the more irrational ones.
As this conference comes to a close, who will ultimately win? Will it be the protester favorite, McCarthy, or the man that seems to have the most support, Humphrey? What will the protesters against Humphrey do if he wins? We will have to wait and see next session. Once again, this has been Aline Saarinen. Stay tuned.